Welcome to Zcast, everybody. I'm Zias Caravala, founder and principal analyst with ZK Research, and I'm here for another one of my thought leadership Zcasts. Before we get started, though, I do want to give a quick shout out to eWeek, my media partner. All my Zcasts are done in conjunction with the eWeek eSpeaks program. Today, I have gentleman Pat La Morte with me, who's the Global Education Solutions Lead for Zoom. And I thought it was a good time to have Pat on because Zoomtopia is coming up, but also we're at the end of August or beginning of September, and it's back to school week. In fact, my little niece, Katia, I'm going to say hi to her. She went back to school today on day of recording. So I think she's starting her 5th grade in Toronto, Ontario. So that's kind of exciting. They're in person, but I know other people that are still in hybrid. Some people are going virtual. And so it's kind of an interesting time now for back to school. So I do think, Pat, it is back to school season. You are the global education lead. There are varying different opinions as to how schools should be conducted, fully remote, fully hybrid. What are you seeing right now?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. Thanks for that great introduction. I appreciate it. It is back to school season. I'm having it here in sunny Florida. So we've been in session for about 3.5 weeks already. But obviously talking to schools around the world, it is different for every case, right? So I think a lot of schools have intentions of fully in person. Some are executing, but I think it's still monitoring day by day. So as I mentioned, I have 3 high school age daughters, and they went in fully, in person, using asynchronous when needed, and already they changed their mind because of an influx of numbers and so forth. So I think it's the best efforts of finding what works for your school, for your culture, for your community. But I think all the above works. I think the ultimate goal, from what I'm hearing, especially in the higher levels of K-12, is they love to find a way to offer hybrid as a parallel track where it's virtual, so they can keep synchronous learning happening.
Yeah, and it does offer some new ways of learning. You can collaborate with people from other schools, things like that. And I think, one of the lessons that I kind of took away from last year is we really don't know what we don't know, right? We have Delta variant creeping around out there. So you could be live, but you might wind up going back virtual, who knows when. And so I think that schools have prepared for that. Now, one of the other lessons, or I guess takeaways from last year, is when the pandemic happened, nobody was really ready, obviously.
Right.
So we jumped into remote education. Some did it well, some not so well. And I think the ones that did it not so well, it was less about the tech, right? The tech works, but it was more about readiness and best practices and things. And so what were some of the major challenges that you saw schools face?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And I think I'm going to start by shouting out, first of all, to all the teachers out there and thanking them, because they are heroes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I spent 26 years in the classroom as a teacher, principal, superintendent. My wife's a teacher, 12th grade. And really, they pivoted, like you said, overnight. And in most cases, they took on 22 jobs. They were a teacher. They were temperature takers, shield wiper downers, monitoring traffic and paths, and they still taught. They still showed up. And so I think, to answer your question, maybe it was about tech in some cases, or the preparedness to handle the tech. But more so, it's the lack of time to train and onboard, the support. Right. So if your school didn't do anything with Zoom or any other program and just went right to Zoom overnight, you had to teach the next day. So a lot of it was trial by error, right? Clicking buttons and or in parallel gaining the support you needed. But I almost thought it was a tactical end of getting the support you needed to solve a problem. It wasn't until about 5-6 months in until you had breathing room to step back and say, okay, this worked. Was it perfect? No. But it worked, so here's what we're going to do going forward, right? And I think what you said earlier was perfect and spot on, is that we weren't expecting it, but we now had time to plan. So I would even challenge the audience to think of beyond COVID. Maybe it's a climate disaster. Maybe it is a sports illness or an injury. Maybe it's just a plan B if you're not going to go fully to handle any situation that arises. Much like you'd have a plan in place for an emergency code red drill, or you have a plan in place for a snow day or a hurricane day, depending where you live, is just have this in place because it goes way beyond the classroom. So I see a lot of ingenuity and really thinking outside of the box now that they can kind of step forward and say, okay, we're still teaching by inviting special guests into the room, maybe experts in the field that wouldn't necessarily travel for a 44-minute class or a 90-minute class, if you will, or maybe even the younger grades, like your fifth grade or fourth grade niece, where she's going to have an opportunity at one point to bring mom or dad to work, talk about what they do. Well, it'd be really cool if they were a firefighter, if they were at the firehouse with an iPad and showing the students exactly what they do, rather than sitting on a smaller chair telling them. So, I think the barrier was just preparedness. You wouldn't enter a normal school year without pre-planning, and no one pre-planned this.
Yeah, and I've seen this movie play out before when schools first started putting tablet programs in place.
Right.
Some of them did it well, some didn't well, and the ones that didn't do it well really didn't know what to do with the tech until there were some best practices, and we're starting to see that to take place now. Now, with that being said, though, I think when Eric Yuan, your CEO and founder, was thinking of Zoom, I don't think he really ever imagined 10-year-olds using these platforms, right? And so it's for you and I to use this in a professional type of setting is much different than a fifth grade teacher trying to teach a bunch of 10-year-olds, right? It's attention spans are different, their focus is different. And I know to help with that, Zoom recently made some interesting enhancements. One such was something called focus mode, right? And so can you describe how some of these enhancements help learning?
Absolutely. And I'm going to start by taking a half a step back, if you will, in that, yes, it was designed as an enterprise solution, but the adaptability to this case, I think, is proven successful based on the simple user interface that we have. I mean, there's literally 9 buttons or 10 buttons to use it. So I saw really, really creative ways of kindergarten teachers holding up pictures of the button they wanted them to press for associations, right? So yeah, I mean, here's the deal. From the very beginning, education has been top priority for Eric and the whole team. And so with such, we made significant, changes to help, fit into that industry and also to innovate and be ahead of the industry. So one mode that you mentioned was focus mode. And focus mode is great. It brings on 2 things. One is a test quiz environment enhancement, and the other is just for privacy of students that may not want other kids to see their background. And so what happens is when you press on focus mode, it's something that the teacher or the instructor will engage. All of the students that are on the meeting cannot see each other. They only can see the teacher. Now the teacher can still see all of the students. So it really does make that enhancement to allow the teacher to have better classroom management, right? And I think a similar functionality to go along with it is when your school signs up for the school licensing, you can have a feature on the back end turned on that says, hey, I'm a school. Therefore, if teacher A loses internet connectivity and doesn't regain within 20 seconds, we're going to send all the students back to the waiting room so that they can't sit on an open call talking to each other. So all the kids go back to the waiting room. They get a little pop-up that says, Mr. La Morte lost connectivity. He'll be right back. And as soon as I regain connectivity, I'll let them all back into the classroom and everything is in a nice, safe environment.
Oh, that's interesting. And that actually makes some sense because I know some of the challenges teachers would have. In fact, I would talk to some of them and they would say that students pre-call, or even they'd be pinning their friends and things like that instead of the teacher. So
right. Well, actually, very good point because you asked for features. So pinning and spotlighting, that's a great user education. And in newer releases, you can spotlight and pin up to 7 participants. So the difference is very subtle but effective. Spotlighting would be done by the host or co-host and makes it apparent on every screen. So if I had a guest speaker in the classroom, or if we had a panel discussion, we would spotlight those 4 or 5 people so that anybody watching would see that. Pinning does the same effect, but for my personal screen. So perhaps I need an ASL translator, and I want to pin that person on my screen so that no matter what happens, that person stays prominently focused so I can see my interpreter as I'm trying to learn with that lesson.
Thanks. And then there's also some features in Zoom that one wouldn't necessarily think of as educational, like you've got polling capabilities for your events platform, but
Right.
I think some of those are being used in education as well, correct?
Absolutely. So we have a few. So a couple of things, we can live stream from Zoom. So a lot of schools are taking advantage of that for graduation, football games, softball games, plays, where they can now invite the broader community in, maybe grandma and grandpa, aunts and uncles, to see these events. Excuse me. The other one we have is breakout rooms. So a teacher can actually take a large class of up to, I think it's 100 people, and break them into up to 50 rooms. So we could have groups of students working with moderators. We can talk into the rooms. And so a lot of schools love that for group work, for study review. And then, like you said, polling. So we have polling, and I'm really happy to say that within the next 2 weeks, we'll have advanced polling. So a teacher can pull together up to 20 polls in a meeting, 10 questions per poll, and she or he can set those ahead of time before the lesson. So if I'm planning out 2 or 3 weeks, I can create the polls and then pull them from the menu, and students would have an interactive experience of answering the polls. When they're done, the teacher can share the results on the screen, and then after the meeting in post, pull the results to see who got which one right or wrong. So now we have the ability to use it as a quick formative grade, or it could be used for a bell ringer or something called a do now. In the future, you'll have opportunity to have up to 6 different types of questions: matching, true and false, fill in the blanks, and you can pull those detailed reports to enter them into your grade book afterwards.
All right, thanks. Now, the other area I want to touch on is security, and I think there's a pretty wide range of concerns around security that I think Zoom's largely fixed or addressed, or however you want to phrase it. But is security, or should security still be a concern for teachers, parents, and students?
I think from a audience perspective, security should always be top of mind, right? Because I'm trusting the education and livelihood of my students to the school. So I would expect it to be. And even with Zoom, like you said, back at the beginning of the pandemic, we made some changes publicly to enhance security to where we are completely dedicated to be a safe environment. Matter of fact, we exceed expectations and put together a whole CISO council to kind of moderate that, and everything is transparent on the website with guides on how to keep your students safe in a meeting, but also keep your children safe. So yeah, we take it very seriously as well. And we also welcome feedback, but we're going to transparently go ahead and exceed the expectations and provide support for parents, teachers, and schools to use.
All right, thanks. That would sure be very helpful. And on that topic, I would think of that as sort of a best practice. Yeah. Since you eat, live, and breathe education, I know that's your background, long background in this as well. Can you provide a couple of best practices for students, for teachers, for parents as we embark upon this year, and how to best maximize learning in this environment?
Absolutely, I'd love to. I'm going to start with different personas. Let's start with parents first. I would say for a parent, make sure you understand Zoom and you know how to use Zoom, so that you can help your student navigate through areas where they might have a hiccup. And you can even open up your own free account. Make sure the students are using the account, give it to them by school, because it's protected under their firewall. Number one. Number two, visit our resource center. We can provide links after the show in the show notes to download the parent guide to using Zoom safely with your children. Students, I would say definitely follow your teacher's protocol, but to get familiar with the layout of Zoom so that Zoom becomes the complement to your lesson, not the obstruction. You want to be able to use Zoom without thinking about it so that you can pay attention to the lesson and move learning forward. Teachers and administrators, I would say exemplar is the best way. Like, use it, model it. Really, if you look at a program like Zoom, the platform, it complements the way you teach. It doesn't change it. So if you enter a Zoom meeting with 20 students, let's say, and you go into full screen mode, the tools disappear. You're teaching. And by the way, if you want, we have some tools to help you engage and so forth. And I would say to teachers too, when you're in that environment, don't be fearful. When it comes down to it, it still is classroom management. It's just on a different playing field. So I would say for teachers, really take some time before school starts to learn Zoom so that you can manage it as a classroom space that you would normally. And the last tip I would have in this, and this is tried and true from many of teachers over the last year and a half, is if you are dealing with a mixed modality where you have 12 students in front of you, maybe 8 or 9 online, maybe they mix and flow based on, quarantine, is regardless, teach to the online student for both. It limits where you need to find things, and the students in the room can still join the same Zoom meeting and mute their microphones, right? This way it's consistent delivery methods. So when that student has to go home, they still know where to find everything. So in the beginning, like I said, we all reacted and people were teaching here and teaching here and teaching here and teaching here. And then they were getting mixed up by just nature of time of where things were located. So just teach to the online student and let both respond appropriately, and it'll make the workflow much easier.
Thanks. That was actually great. The other best practice, I guess, I'll bring up here, and I'll take this from the work I did with education back in the early days of tablets, is you need to think about these things as being able to change the way we educate. You don't want to educate the same way in the digital medium. And you actually alluded to this. If I can bring an expert in, even if I'm back in a full in-person classroom, if I can bring an expert in from, maybe an astronaut or something from the other side of the country, or somebody who's in a different, in another country, maybe represents something else culturally different or something, that is a great way to augment in person by using this digital medium. So I think one of the interesting aspects that platforms like Zoom brings is it allows us to connect digitally even when we're, socially distant. And I think that's, but to do that, and I don't want to pick on schools, but I think schools have really been lagging in their ability to kind of innovate around the new mediums of of technology that we have, because you go to a lot of schools and they're still largely teaching the same way, right? It's instead of chalkboards, it's whiteboards, but not a lot of change.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree totally. Right. And so, especially in the US, we saw an influx as a response of a lot of money from the government to go ahead and help them through this crisis, but even beyond. And I would say no matter where you live and where you operate a school, I would take this opportunity, the silver lining of this really horrible pandemic we lived through, or we're still living through with the Delta variant, to understand what school you want to build, right? Because there's 2 questions I'll throw out to you, any administrator listening, any teacher listening. One is, when I say to you the words future competitiveness, what comes up for your school, your culture, your community? And the second thing is your school identity. You have a legacy of alumni. How are we going to protect that identity in a virtual world? And what are you going to do differently to still feel that sense of legacy of generations before, to learn from it? And the reason I bring that up is very important, because over the past year, as well as teaching, schools had to innovate for board meetings, for graduation, for homecoming week. And by going through them, the ones that were the most successful reimagined what this event could be instead of recreated. Because when you recreate, there's always going to be 1 or 2 things that don't go over directly. And then it seems like it's a failure. Oh my God, it didn't work. This doesn't work. It's going to be horrible. No. But if you say, what could graduation look like where we are today? What can we do to make it special for the students? Because it is a milestone in their life.
Yeah.
When you do that, it takes on a whole meaning of special and will be successful, right? And so what I would say to anybody out there is, and one thing that came out of this is education has never been so accessible to so many personas. So by that statement alone, it really can't go back, because now parents understand, and maybe they're asking in certain schools and districts around the world, does my kid need to be in that building for 7 hours a day? Can I get this other program that's better and use you in the morning? So I would be asking myself is, what am I doing to keep my kids enrolled in my district right now? And number 2 is, when this pandemic happened and we all shifted, it was a unilateral move. A lot of the students came forward that never did before. So what discussions are you having now with your Board of Education, your unions, to give you the agency to meet those kids where they're at, because now they're shining, right? And what's that balance? So those are a couple of questions I would ask is, what school do you want to develop for? And here's the interesting part, and I'll end with this piece on this question is, we don't know. So I would build my classroom environments to be flexible, movable, flexible, because I don't know what that room's going to be used for 3 years from now. We're looking at schools that are working with us that are building brand new multi-million-dollar buildings with no classrooms. They're using Zoom for the delivery of material, and they're bringing the experience into the buildings with labs and so forth, so that when the child is on campus, they're working in more of a mentorship role with the teacher, with hand-on application, learning at home. And what that's doing to level the playing field is, whether I'm in class or not, whether I can make it or not, if I have a conflict, my lesson's still being delivered by the same person with the same personality and same voice. And I can go back and watch it over and over.
Yeah, that's really interesting. In fact, before I get to my next question, I'm going to get on my personal soapbox here.
Please.
And if ever the past year taught us anything, from Joe Biden down, all you government officials, I hope you watch this. We need a national broadband policy, because we've got great tools like Zoom, but a big part of the poor parts of this country does not have adequate broadband. And so that's something that I know in a lot of lower income areas, they still don't have it. And so, I think products like Zoom really can equalize what's been an unfair educational system in some ways. But that's that's a whole different topic. So
no, but it's very important, right? Yeah. So two of priorities of Zoom right now are accessibility. And I say two because accessibility comes in two packages: availability and affordability of equipment, but also connectivity. Yeah. And that has to be addressed. It has to be brought to through E-rate, through government programs. They have to be able to do that, because we're seeing communities around there getting heavily involved to make it happen on their own, because educating children is a community process.
Yeah.
So I see schools working with their local cable companies, broadband, getting hotspots for students. In some cases, by the way, this is the first time the parents have internet in the house. So we have to support them as well.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, Pat. If you can see over my shoulder here, Zoomtopia, September 13th, 14th. I'm pretty excited about it. I've actually got a speaking slot there myself.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, more on hybrid work than this topic. But now, for people watching this, if they want to find out more about what Zoom's doing in education, I know there's a number of educational, both higher ed and K-12 at Zoomtopia. We're going to put up a slide in a second that shows some of those. But why don't you describe, tell us what to expect there?
Absolutely. It must be the go-to event, because I have it here as well. So in education, we actually have 10 tracks this year, and they revolve around one common theme. The common theme is returning to the classroom of confidence and imagining a future of education. So from the keynote experience on day 2, we also have 3 external presentations by partners of ours, which are very good about single source messaging and emergency communications, one around how to adapt Zoom to your classroom. And then we have 7 internal. And what you're going to explore in the internal is fascinating. Number one, we really tackle the notion to give teachers tips and tricks on how to support students and parents around social emotional learning. And we have a panel of 3 global CEOs of nonprofits that all were at least 20-year educators in their life as well. And they really do a great job of outlining just tangible bite-sized tips and tricks to use to help, because it's much, much needed. Secondly, we're going to talk about teaching anywhere. So Dr. Lance Ford on my team is also still a teacher in Oklahoma. In his classroom, he talks about in-person, hybrid, and virtual learning, and really breaks them down to see what is a good fit for your teaching style. And at the end, because of our last event, Zoom Academy, a few weeks ago, one of the most requested items from the audience was, Lance, we'd love to see your classroom because you're a teacher. So at the end, we do a director's cut and we do a tour of his classroom. And you can see his whiteboard and the round tables and how he uses it. So it's behind the scenes tour showing you that this is not necessary, but this is what works for him and what each segment is in case you wanted to try to research it on your own. And then another big topic is the Learn Anywhere. And that's really what you alluded to before, is that we now have the opportunity to bring people into the classroom, but we have the opportunity to break down the walls of the classroom. So we bring on two gentlemen that are teachers that use Zoom to host digital field trips, but also to bring other organizations into the classroom. And you'll see also ways you can have your students tell a story. Because I really believe that we need to start paying more attention to the student voice. It's very important. So those are some of the highlights. Again, our slide we'll put up has all 10 sessions listed. And if you go to zoomtopia.com, you can register. If you're the first 50,000, you'll have the full immersive experience. And right now we're tracking about a third of the engagement already is educators.
Wow, that's a big number.
That's a big number. So we're excited about that. And they all live on demand. So you can go in there. We're using our brand new Zoom events platform, which we're excited to show off again. Allow you to create your own itinerary so you can pick all the sessions that you want. And there's something for everybody. There's 120 sessions running in 2 days.
Yeah, well, great. And, Pat, I think we're about out of time here. I do want to thank you, though, and hope you understand the role that Zoom is going to play here in educating, helping our future leaders and innovators in this country get educated. I think it's a very important role, and it's good to see Zoom and companies like yourself take it seriously. So anyways, Pat, thanks for joining me today. And on behalf of everybody watching, I hope all you students out that watch us had a great, first couple of weeks back at school. And on behalf of Pat, I'm Zias Caravalla. See you next time on Zcast.